We're live with
Woo!
Jeff. Oh, that was interesting. Right. It's
It
just that
still
when you.
says still says off air on my end, but I don't know.
Okay, how about now?
Okay, now it says live.
Now we're live. Live
All
again.
right.
Woohoo again. Right. I'm going to ask Jeff Victor's questions. First of all, folks, this book is a typology book based on Kersey's temperaments, and it has all the hormones involved with the temperaments. Ooh. Moving things forward.
Did
Right.
you just get that? Because it was
Yeah.
somebody. It was a Rachel that said recommended the
Linda.
book.
It was Linda. Linda
Linda.
kept going
Okay.
on about this book.
Yeah, I knew somebody had talked about it. So you're pretty quick on the draw with the book purchasing. Almost.
Well, I went on Amazon. It was 86p,
Yeah.
so I thought I'll pull the lever on that one. Right.
I I don't know what 86p means, but I guess that's cheap.
Yes,
Okay.
it's probably about $1.15 or
Oh,
something.
okay. Yeah, that's pretty cheap.
Okay. So Victor's question is, it's like studies and career, the schooling and careers, whatever you within that range you'd like to talk about. If you dry up, I'll ask you a follow-up question.
You see that technically that's not actually a question. So just
I know.
be like Jeopardy. You got to form it. You got to phrase it in the form of a question.
I know that's odd. It's um. If you say please, I don't know.
So what do you actually want to know? Like
What do
what do you want to
I want
talk
to know
about?
about?
Like how I was as like a little kid or high school or what?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you said what you were like at school, and then afterwards, that'd be fine.
Okay, like starting from the very beginning.
Well, also like the sort of subjects you liked, the subjects you didn't like,
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
In preschool, the kids were mean to me and pulled my hands off the monkey bars, and I fell to the ground and was sad and cried. Um, so now that I've got the audience's sympathy, uh, in uh, in kindergarten, I remember I talked about this recently, I think, but it wasn't recorded. But in kindergarten, in Maryland, they had this kind of system where you went to different stations throughout the day, but they had one called the listening center where you could listen to records. Um, had headphones and they had like various read along books where the whole Tinkerbell will tell you when to change the page, those type of things. Um, and I always wanted to do that. Like I, I mean, my whole life I always do that thing where I get interested in really one thing, and I just want to do that hardcore and not have to keep changing to something else, like just because it's time to change. But I remember that it was like a big deal. There was like a parent teacher conference to discuss the fact that I was doing nothing but hanging out in the listening center and not expanding my mind by doing things like playing with wooden blocks and stuff like that, or playing house, or whatever the different stations were. I don't even remember. But yeah, the listening center was my thing. Um, so I guess that kind of shows that I was always very audio. You know, liked radio and music and all that kind of stuff at an early age. Um, and I also remember when I was a little kid, I really liked clocks and I liked calendars. Um, one of my favorite gifts I got, I think, for birthday or Christmas or whatever it was one year was I got this. It was like a cardboard calendar, but where you had the dates were on like paper things where you could stick the days into, so you could use the same like template to put in all the months, and it had like different ones that represented like holidays and other things like that you could put at various places or you and rather than just the numbers. So I enjoyed that. I liked clocks. I had this owl clock where it was like the owl eyes and it has the numbers and yeah. I'm not good at describing stuff, but anyway.
Did you ever build a clock from
That
Lego?
looked like a bomb? No, I didn't.
No.
Build a
A little
clock
bit
from
topical.
Lego.
A
Don't
little
remember
bit
doing
topical.
that. No, but I think at that age I didn't have Legos yet. That was like that came a little later. Like I can remember the time I most played with Legos was like somewhere in the like third, fourth grade era. You know, because I had a friend at that time that had a ton of Legos, and when we went to his house, we played with him there because he had like all the sets, like the moon landing set and the other like things like that, the space stuff. So we did, you know, spaceship games and things with that. But as far as school goes, I'm trying to remember like.
Before you go back to school, I can ask you a bit about because you mentioned there about playing toys. You got an INTP brother and an ISTP brother.
Uh-huh.
What were the sort of differences you saw between yourself and them in the way you would play with
Um,
toys or interests at that age?
I don't know. We were all pretty similar. I think it seemed like, but I guess my INTP brother always had, you know, a thing about like electronics and computers and stuff. So even when he was playing with toys, he wanted to do something related to that with them. So he had like one of the. I remember at some age he got this electronic set, you know, where it had things like transistors and diodes and all that kind of good stuff that I don't understand, but he liked doing things with it. Um, at one point, he figured out he could plug it into the VCR. That was a few years later because we didn't get a VCR until like '86 or '87. Anyway,
Um,
he figured out he could plug it into the VCR and he'd actually use a microphone and we could record ourselves talking over television shows. Like you could
oh
record
wow!
where our
Now,
voices were, you know.
now, where's your father? Would he have raised now if he'd have put his favourite program on there, and then he hears his kids over his favourite program? Maybe it would have been. Oh yeah, and just so the audience knows, I think your INTP brother's 2 years older than you.
Yeah.
So did
Um,
anything happen like that where you recorded voices over one of your dad's favourite shows that he
no,
recorded?
first of all, he didn't have favorite shows. He called the TV the idiot box. Uh, his what he would do with the TV was he would come in the middle of something we were watching and just take the remote and start flipping around. So we would be irritated because we were trying to watch one particular thing and he was just flipping around and talking about how there was nothing good on TV. So that's what he liked to do. No, we didn't record anything over shows that were already recorded. It was like you had to do it while you were recording, and then if you were talking to the microphone, then when you played it back, you had the voice over that. My dad did object to us doing that because he said it caused some problem with it. Like I think he just invented that, but he said it was somehow bad for the TV or bad for the VCR or something. You know, going to cause some electric shortage or I don't know what he said, but uh, because I was using it, like I used it for not even the microphone, but just the speaker part of it because uh, we didn't subscribe to, you know, at that time didn't subscribe to like the premium channels you had to pay extra for on the cable for like HBO, and HBO had Wimbledon tennis on it, and
Ooh.
so, um, but I could listen to it because we figured out that when you plugged the electronic set in, you could listen and it wouldn't be scrambled. Like the video on the TV was scrambled, but the audio, if you plugged this into it, you could hear it without any interruptions, without any static or anything. And I don't remember whether my brother or me were the one that figured that out. He probably did, but once we knew that, then
So
I used it to listen to that. But my dad didn't want me doing that, so he
so
put a stop
were,
to it when he was there.
were you slightly disappointed if you heard things on the commentary such as, "Oh, Steffi Graf, she looks really good today"? You
No,
wanted to see her.
no, I don't remember feeling that. Like I always was just happy that I could hear stuff. Like it was
Mm.
when I could access something like that, and it felt like okay, I'm getting this thing I'm not supposed to be able to. That was it was just cool. You know, I didn't spend much time thinking about what I didn't have access to. I mean, I'm sure I did some of the time, but I mean, I don't recall any really having any overwhelming feeling about that. It was like more just ecstatic that I had access to this thing. I felt the same way about like getting far off radio stations or TV channels when the weather was just right and be able to tune in something because it felt special, like you had access to this thing that was not usual. So, um, yeah, the only significant difference as far as playing, like I always felt like, and I'm sure this is kind of one of those things they always talk about with the middle child feelings, but I always felt like my brothers would play games together, and I always had to join their games, and they never wanted to join mine. Like when I was the one that started something, there were exceptions to that. Like when I went out inside and played football, my younger brother would sometimes want to play with me, but then he got mad at me because he said I tackled him too hard. So he didn't want to play as long as I did. But the thing is, I would tackle myself just as hard when I played by myself, and I was playing both teams. And so, I'd throw to myself and then I would tackle myself and I hit the ground pretty hard. So,
And here's a thing a lot of people don't know is that Jeff, the true blue American, actually played cricket as a child.
well,
How did that come about?
a weird version of it, because I
Yeah.
had a friend from India, and he taught me sort of the ghetto cricket, I guess you could say, because we just did this one where like he would throw it to me. Like we had trees. Like he found a place in the yard where there were like trees where you could run back and forth between the trees, and those were the wickets. And then we just used a baseball bat and a tennis ball for the cricket ball, since he determined that was closer to a cricket ball than a baseball because it could bounce. So yeah,
And also, you're little kids. You don't want to be throwing a cricket ball at each other or a baseball.
little kids, you want to throw whatever you can at each other.
Yeah,
'Cause
okay.
it's
I
fun.
was forgetting. I was forgetting the type of kids involved. um. So, so when you then went into what is it, high school, and how did you feel towards the different subjects?
um, well, my best subject was always lunch, followed by recess or whatever, kind of playing around sports type stuff. But I did like music also, like in elementary school, and some of the stuff in social studies. It depended on what it was. Like I was fascinated by certain things, like uh, countries and stuff about countries, like the fact, all the stuff about all the different cultural stuff about the country, like the flag and the kind of government they had, and what their major imports or exports or and stuff, like all those little kind of informational things about a country that made them who they were, or whatever. That I kind of was fascinated with that
Yeah.
stuff. I also really liked stuff about the U.S. presidents for some reason. I kind of got.
And, and folks, he was like really into it because you would like carry this interest home with you, and you would like actively seek out encyclopedias to like study up on this. Is that right?
Well, not as much home as in the library at school. We didn't have encyclopedias at home,
Right.
but yeah, no, home I usually had different stuff I did, but at school, like yeah, so some stuff related to like geography and social studies and things like that. I was kind of halfway into. When it came to science, I liked the life science type of stuff, things about animals and forests and things like that, and uh, oceans and space. I liked some of the space stuff. I liked learning about the planets and things like that. Um, and some things about like weather and climate and things like that were kind of fun. Um,
So,
and then when I was in like third or fourth grade, I can't remember, we did maybe it was fifth grade. I don't know. There was some year we did a thing that was called Create a Country, where you could, and I knew it was coming because my older brother had it the year before, so I had already decided, like I'd already come up with all these things that I was going to do for my country when I get a
details.
chance to do it. But then, of course,
Details.
the funny part was that because I had done all that in advance, and then I had told my mother about these things, when I actually got to the part where I was doing the creating, there was this expectation of what I was going to do because I had talked about these things before. So, of course, I had to change it to something else. I had to create a new country because then I was like, oh, by this time, like, she's like, oh, you're going to do this. I had created a country I called Kahupa. And so she said all this stuff about like, oh, you're going to finally get a chance to do Kahupa. And then when I actually got the instructions on how to do the stuff, whatever, I made up a different country called Wooden. So it was, and then she is all surprised, like, oh, I can't believe you didn't do Kahupa or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, well, it was boring by then. I wanted to do this other country.
Did the president's name sound? Of course, you wouldn't have known about it. But anything like Mitt Romney, like president of Wooden, anything like that?
No,
No. Okay.
I actually did. It's funny you say that because one of those countries, I think it was only for Kahupa. I actually did have like a list of they weren't presidents, but I called them like leaders or something like that. Anyway, I was one of them, of course, but they only had 2-year terms. So the country started the year I was born, 1976. So it was like the first leader had been there 76 to 78, and then there was 78 to 80, and so on. And I was the leader from like 82 to 84 or something like that. I don't remember.
So you'd really thought about term limits?
Yeah. They only were not term limits, but just the terms themselves were only 2 years.
Right.
Because what happened is the leader that came after me, the third or fourth leader, actually served like 12 years or something. I mean, a long time. So there wasn't actually term limits. There was just the first few. They only served one term. So anyway, but yeah, I'm trying to think about other school subjects. Some history stuff was, so it was interesting. So stuff in the social studies area. I always hated math. Math was always my worst, and saw no use or purpose to math in any way, shape, or form. It was always terrible. So what's that leave? I guess English and language arts type stuff.
Was
I
that
liked
a source of
creative writing.
Yeah.
I liked anything where I got to create stuff was cool. So that aspect of English stuff was fun to be able to create stories or poems or things like that. But I didn't like having to spend a lot of time studying, other people's literature and things like that, especially because they always had these very rigid, things where you had to learn this particular interpretation of whatever it was, and that was like the gospel of whatever. You had to learn that and not deviate from that, and I always didn't like that. I always thought, well, I wish the author would like rise up and say, no, that's not what I meant. Stop teaching people that.
Yeah. So you felt like you were just regurgitating what the teacher's
yeah,
opinions.
And my handwriting was always bad, so of course I got graded badly for that. And, spelling, I was kind of off and on with. Like there were some things was another thing that I was back when I was a little kid. I don't know if anybody ever heard of the term dyslexia before.
It was very new.
Yeah, it was basically like, so with me, you had teachers that basically would imply that I was very selective. Like I would try sometimes and not others, which part that was partially true, but sometimes I really was trying and I just simply failed. And so they would get mad at me because I could spell some things really well. I even won a spelling bee one time in a class one, not like a huge school-wide thing. And yet I could fail spelling stuff they thought was easier sometimes. And then also I could read, like they knew I could read at whatever, so-called advanced level. And yet when I was asked to read aloud, I would always struggle with it. So they would think I was like not trying or pretending that I couldn't read or something. And that's not what it was. So I had some issues in that area, but and sometimes I would just stubbornly come to something that I would just think was such a waste of time that I just would refuse to do it. Like when I was in 5th grade, we had this thing they called Wordly Wise, and I got really tired of that stuff. And it was this workbook we had to do all this stuff in, and I I I uh, I was very colorful in my what I did with that workbook and some of the things that I did to it and wrote in it. So my teacher was concerned about some of that. Uh, and we had this thing like on Fridays, we were supposed to go up to show the teacher what we had gotten done for the week, and then we had like lined up and showed her, and then she graded it based on that. And so I had multiple weeks where I went up there and uh, I hadn't done anything, so she had to give me a 0.
So,
Um,
do you think that a lot of the traits that David Kersey says that artisans have, the artistry, audacity, and adaptability, do you think that showed while you were at school? So it was like more so than the other children that
well, I'm sure there were plenty of other artisan children, so
yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I definitely noticed the difference even as a kid. Of course, I like to believe that I was so, I was completely unique and there was nobody like me and all that stuff. But more realistically, obviously, I'm sure there were people like me, but yeah, I noticed the difference between the people that were like the, you know, always follow the rules and be the teacher's pet kind of people, as well as like the kind of hierarchies that formed kind of with the kids and stuff, and the kids that tried to be the bossy leader ones and stuff like that. Um, so, yeah.
Okay, so when you then start doing all of your SAT type stuff, uh, for people, for the non-American audience, they might not. So what was it like? How much option did you have in terms of the subjects that you chose, or did you, or was it
Very
like a
little.
once? So
Yeah,
it was one size fits all then.
well, there was. I mean, we had. The older you get, the more you have certain things. Like there's certain electives. Like I did. In like sixth grade was the first time you actually got to choose something. Well, I say you got to choose. Theoretically, the student got to choose, but of course the parents could override the students, and
Yeah.
that's what happened in my case because I wanted to be in the band like my brother had been, and that was vetoed by my father, who didn't want to pay for another musical instrument. Um,
Ooh.
and then when I said, okay, well, let me take the one that's one semester of art and one semester of music, my mother vetoed that because she said that that was the class, that was the one that the low class kids were in, and that I should be in choir because I had been in the church choir and that I was had a good voice, and so I should do that, even though I didn't want to. So that's what they signed me up for was choir, and so I spent a year miserable in the choir. Did not enjoy that because I hated most of the songs we did. There were a couple of exceptions, but most of the time it was just really, really annoying and boring. And you talked earlier about like times where you were lamenting something that you didn't see or hear. Well, that was what it was like then. I didn't like the fact that I've been forced in the choir, so I got out of that as soon as I could, which was the next year. Um,
What?
so in seventh grade,
Well, what?
I can't actually remember for sure the electives. I know I took art one year, but I can't remember if that was seventh or eighth grade. Um, and then I took eighth grade. I had a thing that was like intro to theater production, and that was really sort of the beginning of my theater interests. Like, I mean, as far as school goes, I had always sort of like I said, I'd been interested in radio and music and things like that. So performance, was always a thing. When I was in first grade, I played Santa Claus in the school play. In fact, and that was a one day only performance, and I was sick with the flu or something pretty bad that the day of the performance, but I had my father take me to school anyway just to perform my part as Santa Claus and then go back home. So that's how dedicated I was,
And
to the performance that I had to show up and be Santa Claus,
and
even when I was sick.
do you think
So
you yeah? Do you think you even said as a kid the show must go on?
Yeah, I don't know if I actually said that, but I'm sure it probably, it added to the realism of
Yeah.
Santa Claus because I probably had my face was red, so it really fit the image of Santa and his jolly red face. Um, Even though I probably wasn't, probably didn't do a very good job of the actual actual performance of the lines because I was sick. But anyway, but I tried. I showed up. But yeah, so the two, I guess you could say the two kind of main areas that I really enjoyed as I got older were theater type stuff, but also like radio and broadcasting, also, which of course are somewhat related to each other. And so in high school, I played soccer as a freshman, but the problem was we have a system in Texas, and they have it in some other places too. They call no pass, no play, which means if you do sports and you fail a class, any class, that you're not eligible to play that sport for a whole 6 week period. So I failed algebra right before the main part of the soccer season, which means I didn't get to play except in one game. I played in one game, and then the next period came. I was ineligible for 6 weeks, so
But
basically the rest of the season.
well, as an NT, I'm thinking, wait a minute, they should have done that based on the aggregate amount of points you got. So they're like, yes, you failed algebra, but you could like get some points from other subjects to like compensate.
Well, feel free to come testify to
Yeah,
that before the
yeah,
Texas legislature.
yeah. Go back
Uh,
in time.
yeah, there was quite a bit of debate about when that again instituted. Ross Perot was actually one of the people who argued against it. Uh,
It's
so
crazy.
um, anyway, that and of course, also when I failed a class, my father would ground me. So for that 6 weeks, not only was I not able to play soccer, but I also couldn't watch TV or go anywhere with friends or anything like that. So I'd have a miserable 6 weeks where I was stuck in my room doing nothing basically, but schoolwork, um, which of course I didn't do a lot of anyway. So once again, didn't really achieve its purpose. But anyway, because soccer had basically been a waste of time because of not being able to play during most of the season, I only did that my freshman year and decided not to go back to it for my sophomore year. Uh, so the two classes that I really spent, or most of my high school time really getting into were theater and broadcasting. Which the only class they actually had was a class called broadcast journalism. Um, but that was awesome because I got to in the fall, uh, one of the things we did was we did the production of every football game, and I mean, in the spring we did basketball and a couple other things too. But the football games we did every single one, and uh, I got to be one of the commentators. And at first I was like the color commentator, but then the guy that was the play-by-play guy decided to quit, so I got to be the play-by-play guy from then on. So even in the playoff games, um, I was doing play-by-play, and one of them actually two of them got professionally produced by a company called Barker Productions, and they actually put them on TV. On the cable had a channel that was like sort of the Access Channel or something like that. I don't remember what they called it, but they showed those on there. Um, and the final one I was in was actually the state semifinal game, where somebody who had been a student of that teacher before, the broadcast journalism teacher, actually came back and did the play-by-play for that game, but I did commentary on that with him. So that was still a fun experience. And he was a guy that actually had been a DJ on local radio and stuff. So he had experience with that. He actually came and talked to the class about that. So of course, I was sort of enamored with him. But also kind of, it was kind of a, I don't know what the word, mixed feelings because I admired him, what he was able to do, and I wanted to do what he did. But he also kind of made me feel bad because he said that if I really wanted like a radio job, that I could get it. Like he was like, I said, well, I didn't have a ride to go, some radio station way far away from me, and he said like, call them, say you'll do anything, ride your bike there. If you really want this, you'll do what you can to get it. And I remember thinking, well, that's easy for you to say, but it isn't that easy for me to do. And of course, I realized that some of that was just my own fears, but some of it really was my parents just objecting to. They weren't going to say, oh yeah, you can ride your bike to Bryan, which is Bryan College Station right next to each other, but it's like would have been like 6 or 7 miles away or whatever, riding my bike at night and stuff like that. They weren't gonna be approving of that. So anyway, I finally did get my first actual radio thing when I found out that the station that Texas A&M had, cable radio station, um, that they would let people be DJs even if they weren't A&M students. So I did it at least in the summer. So I did it in the summer, 2 summers in a row when I was 16, and then when I was 17, I had a show on there. But of course, cable radio doesn't reach a very large audience, so there weren't that many people listening to that. But it was still a fun experience, and it was sort of it was my first experience actually working at a radio station, even though it wasn't a paying gig. In fact, I had to pay to do it, but it was still a lot of fun and um, a learning experience. So, and then the theater aspect, I was in drama class through high school, so I was in productions with that, and then I got involved in community theater stuff here locally because my dad had first actually, and he had directed a play, or he'd been an assistant director, and then so I showed up to audition to something he was assistant directing, and that was my first. I'd actually been on the crew for one show. He acted in the show, and I was like this part of the stage crew. And so I auditioned for the next show, and I got a part in that. And so I did several community theater plays.
So, going back to the artisan's facility with language, what were your school reports like for English?
What do you mean school reports?
Oh, you mean you never got like reports on how you were doing?
Oh, report
in
cards?
English.
Well, it varied over the years depending on how interested I was in what we were doing. My senior year, I actually had one 6-week period where I failed English because it was one of those where the entire period was the same book, and it was Jane Eyre, and I didn't read the book. So, and it's still, despite that, here goes into the adaptability side and artistry probably combined, is that one of the things we had to do when we had a book like that is we had this thing called inner outer circle, where the desks were like put around in this circle where there was the people in the outer circle would ask questions of the people in the inner circle. And I was able to, despite not reading the book, successfully BS my way to a B in the inner outer circle, despite not having ever read the book. And I think to this day, I still think probably part of the reason I got as high a scores as I did was the teacher was impressed with how well I was able to come up with stuff when she knew that I didn't know what I was talking about. Like, I was able to come up with things that sounded somewhat plausible about a book that I had never read, based on what other people were saying. So I had that ability to take, like, I was listening to what other people were asking and answering to get sort of an idea about probably what was going on in the book, enough for me to come up with my own answers, even if they didn't really make any sense. They were they were just vague enough. There's a case where I didn't use the details on purpose because the idea was to talk about something I didn't know what I was talking about. So, if you're more vague and talk about whatever, you can do it better. But
So
yeah, it varied over the years as far as my grades in English. It kind of depended on what was going on.
So was English for you a sort of like a sort of a conflict between this is something I could be good at, but I'm given all of these rules all the while. You need to do it like this. You need to say this.
Yeah, there was a lot of that. Yeah, and I think when it came to the types of papers that we were asked to write for English, because there were things that were like, and I've forgotten a lot of the terminology now, but one of them was persuasive papers. Didn't like doing persuasive papers because those were like, they always required a bunch of research and you had to look up all the stuff and then try to make some point. And I never cared about any of the points, at least very rarely. So I'd be like arguing for some cause that I didn't even care about and trying to persuade somebody of something with stupid research and citing sources for things that I didn't care about. So stuff like that was very boring to me. And yeah, the overstructuring of it all just made it boring. like I said, creative writing, when I actually had a chance to write stories and things like that, that was fun. So, especially when I could take something that was sort of like a boring assignment and turn it into something interesting. Like, I mean, even outside of English, I did that with like, when I was in geometry, one of the things that the geometry teacher did was um, assign something where you had to learn words that were related to whatever that section of geometry was. But um, she said you could write the words like in sentences, or you could write a story, as long as it was at least like a page long. So I wrote like much more than that because I would get going and I would write this long, detailed story, and still made it with a cliffhanger though. Because like there was one I remember, it was Captain Scalene and his adventures in the Pythagorean quadrant, and and at the end, like his ship crash landed, and he was like dangling over the side of the thing, whatever, and it was unsure whether he was going to live or die. And of course, I said to be continued. So um, poor Captain Scalene will never know what happened to him because I never finished the story. And that of course, I had learned from I had reading comic books, and the way comic books would have, the final frame was always a cliffhanger where you wanted to get the next comic book. So um, I did that with that as well. That was another thing my brother did first that I kind of copied, but he created a comic he called the Box Ills, and it was like a sci-fi thing. And of course, the main reason that he chose to make it that way is because he couldn't draw people, but he could draw like cubes, three-dimensional, where you draw the box and then draw the other
Oh
part to
wow,
make it a cube.
that's so
And
NT.
and yeah, exactly. So that's why he had the Box Ills were this alien race that was cubes. so so of course I copied him and made my own comic, but my solution was instead of having the boxes, I just had heads,
Yeah.
like faces, and so I couldn't draw bodies either. But rather than do like stick figures, I would just have the disembodied heads talking to each other. So to have a little circle and draw the face, and then they could draw hair on them, and that was all I needed.
Yeah. In England, we have a lot more. When we were at school, there's a lot more of like, as you were talking about elective. So, in your last 2 years of high school, were you forced to do mathematics in your last 2 years of high school?
The second to last year I was, yeah, because that was algebra two, um, and then actually the second semester I did thing they called MOCE, Math of Consumer Economics, and then I ended up taking algebra two over again in summer school because I had failed it the first time. So that's when I finally finished with math. Was that summer in between my junior and senior year, and then senior
See,
year I was free of math. Woohoo!
you see, if you'd have been in England, you could have taken at the time. You could have done 3 A levels in whatever subjects you liked. So you could have done drama, if you're interested in these, just 3 subjects. Say you could have done drama, English, psychology, or whatever 3 subjects you liked. You didn't have to do science. You didn't have to do maths.
Yeah, senior year I didn't have math or science, but I did have government and economics and English. Um, I think those were the main required courses. I'm trying to remember if there was something else that was actually required. Because basically, I only like my first semester of senior year, I only had 5 classes. So drama was one of them. So I took like debate and speech or oral interpretation, whatever they call it. I did that. So that was a sort of an elective thing, but it was one of the options to take. And then for government, it was actually the honors class, and what they did for that in the fall was the entire semester was geared around this thing that was called the We the People competition, which was like a national thing, and if you kept going, then could go all the way to Washington D.C. Which my younger brother's class actually did qualify for the state one, but then they didn't go to the national one. So um, with the one I did it, we didn't make it to the state one. But anyway, And that was like basically the We the People thing was based around like the Bill of Rights and like um, arguing points related to a particular amendment. And you basically had like, you were sort of like debate teams on both sides of something that was considered an issue related to that amendment. So, um, there were things like the First Amendment as it relates to stuff like obscenity and things like that, and Second Amendment stuff about like whether it was constitutional to have any kind of gun control laws and stuff like that. So there were things like that. Anyway,
Was was there anything about probably wouldn't have done it, but like to what extent? Because like the First Amendment says, Congress shall not establish a religion,
mhm,
and at the time they had state religions.
right.
And then it was just assumed when they had the 14th Amendment that sort of like moved. Anyway, it's not Constitution hangout.
Uh-huh.
I'll stop myself from digressing. Oh yeah, so
But yeah,
before my
well,
yeah.
I was just going to say that the government stuff was, I did have some interest in some of that. Some of that was fun. Not always in the way that they particularly
Oh,
did it in class, but I did like some of the stuff related to that.
just a very important thing that people should know is at what age were you recording C-SPAN and rushing home to watch it?
That was, I guess, when I was about 19 or 18 or 19, I think, because it was after the 94 election when the Republicans took over Congress. So it would have been spring of 95. So that was my first year of college.
Right. Now nice transition. So, when you went to college, which course were you enrolled in, and how did it go?
Um, well, uh, there were again sort of take things I had to take because they were like required towards any degree or whatever. And I was going to, a community college or a junior college. So it was very basic, like, the first level of like English. And basically it was sort of like do the same stuff you were doing in high school, but just do the college version of them. Uh, but of course, because I had done so poorly in math, I first took a class called Intermediate Algebra, which didn't actually count towards college credit, despite it being a college course. But I figured it was probably good for me to take that before I took the college algebra class, which I ended up taking in the summer because I thought it would probably be easier just because the high school algebra I'd finally been able to get in the summer. Because the summer school kind of forces you to like work at a faster pace, and
Yeah.
that was what I had to do in order to pass math. Because if I had any time to procrastinate and put it off, I would. So I would get behind. And anyway, as far as what I actually enjoyed there, I took a mass communications class, but of course I still didn't have a car. So there were a couple of things where I wasn't there for in time to go on a field trip somewhere. So I didn't get to go to the radio station or the TV station, and those were like two of the main things I was looking forward to. I was on the trip where we went to the local newspaper, but not on the TV and radio station ones. So that sucked. But I still made an A in that class.
So
But mass communications was fun, and then I took a government class there, and it sucked because the teacher he acted so uninterested in the subject, and he made everything out to be like so cut and dried, and like he would talk about like these hot button political issues, but he would present them in a way that made it, if you were completely new to government and politics, you would have no idea why those issues were like these big contentious issues, because the way he presented them, they were so matter of fact, like, oh, this side says this and this one says this, and it was like, okay, why is this a big deal? And so I would have taught and the funny thing is he had us do these papers, and one of the things was the last paper we did was sort of grading him. It's like talking about what we thought of his teaching and how would we teach the class differently. So I really let him have it in that last paper. I was like, I would actually teach the class like I was interested in the subject, not that I was trying to get it over with and go do something else. Um, and I would engage the class some, have participation, actually talk out some of these things instead of just very dryly presenting everything like it was not important. So yeah, I took that opportunity, and I got full points for that last paper. So evidently he was not above accepting constructive criticism on the papers, and that's why I guess that's why he assigned in the first place, is he was willing to listen to what everybody had to say about him. So
Yeah. Maybe he was just bored of like just doing it the same thing
it
again
could
and
be,
again.
because see, the
Yeah.
thing is I had actually requested him, because the first semester I was there, or I guess the beginning of the second semester, I dropped out 2 different times where I withdrew but then came back. So the first time that I dropped out, I thought I was going to have this restaurant career. I have this, history of having this idea of, oh, this thing I'm doing is going to take off, so I don't need something else. And so that was what happened that time. Is as I was working at McDonald's and I had been promoted to manager, and I thought, oh, here's what I'm going to be. This, I'm going to have this career in restaurant management. So I'm like, okay, well, school's boring. I'll drop out of school. But I had started that semester with the government class with this guy, um, and I was there for like the first couple of classes, and he seemed really cool. Like, and the first paper he assigned was all about like talking about ourselves, what our experience was, what we knew about government, what we were interested in, and I was like, this guy seems different. He seems cooler than the typical teacher, and this seems like it'd be a fun version of the class. So when I came back the second time and took the class in the following fall, I requested him on purpose because I thought, oh yeah, I remember that guy was a cool teacher. I want to have his class. And then it ended up being terrible. And not terrible because of, some teachers I had in high school or whatever were terrible because they were like, kind of mean or strict or hard teachers. He wasn't any of that. He was just a lousy teacher. Like, at least the way he did it, that time, it was just he just was so boring and uninterested. So
Seems that the
anyway,
American
well, but
school
before
system.
I move
Okay,
on,
go on.
I want to say, because a lot of times you'll have people that like they'll do videos, or they'll be on TV shows, or things where, especially like famous people, will be on like a talk show and they'll talk about something that happened, or the teacher they didn't like in school or something like that, and they'll say, well, I won't name their name or something like that. So I don't know if I'll ever get the opportunity to be on like a late night talk show or something, because I don't know if I'll ever be somebody who's famous or interesting enough to be in demand. So I want to take this opportunity, since we are on this worldwide broadcast,
Yes,
say that
worldwide.
my algebra 2 teacher in high school, her name was Mrs. Griffiths. Okay, I am going to name her name. She was terrible, and she was a lousy teacher, and she basically kicked me out of her class because my grades were too low. Not because she was concerned about me, but she was concerned about herself. She even said that to me, that I was ruining her failure rate. So her concern as a teacher was her reputation, and not anything about actually trying to teach me anything. Rather than it being like, hey, maybe we should work on this after school to try you to actually learn the material. No, it was like, you're ruining the way I look. I want you out of my class. So yeah, she was terrible, and a horrible teacher. And I hope she's probably dead by now. But even if she is still alive, hopefully she's having a really bad time. And I wanted to take that opportunity to say that she sucked, and name her name. So Mrs. Griffiths, wherever you are, you really sucked, and you're still
Wow.
terrible.
Wow, that it takes a lot for Jeff to say these kind of harsh words.
Well, I want to say, like, I've always said that I don't hold grudges, and I don't. Like, I don't, I don't have some. It doesn't consume me, anything about her. I just want to be factual about it and say that that was an example of a terrible teacher, and somebody who should have never been given that job in the first place. And if you're a teacher, hopefully that inspires you to be better, where you're not the kind of teacher that somebody will be talking about like that about, because you actually do care about trying to get teach your students, and not just worrying about your own reputation.
Right. So how did then things go at college?
Well, like I said, I dropped out.
Right. Okay.
The last time that it happened, I what happened was I had been going to class, and I would that by then I had a car. By my last semester of college, I had my first car, and I was getting into driving for the first time, where I would just have fun driving around listening to music. And what I started doing is I would be on my way to class, and I wasn't I wasn't looking forward to going to class. I was in the car driving, listening to music, and I would be like, you know what? And this is just, subconscious. Like, I don't mean like I'm having this conversation with myself, but it would just be like, I'm enjoying doing this. I'm going to keep doing this. And so I would just not stop at the school, just keep on going and listen to music in my car. And so I started missing class doing that. And so, again, this goes to one of those times where if I was somebody who felt guilty,
Yeah.
I might start to feel that way because my mother was paying for me to go to school and I was not going to class. But I didn't feel that way. But I did eventually say, I should probably go ahead and withdraw again, because if I'm not going to pass anything anyway, I am kind of wasting the money to continue to do this. So, and I wasn't sure at
But
that point I'd get a refund or anything anyway, but I figured I'd do whatever. So
but
anyway, I took a couple of trips with my mother. Went to San Francisco, went to Spokane, Washington, because at some point, again, this is another thing, this is an example of me. I go into an area and I'm sure that this is the thing that I'm going to somehow do something with, and then I eventually drop it. And one of the things was um, I became really into Catholic stuff, which sounds kind
ooh,
of funny, I guess, again, to people who have never done that. But I grew up like my parents were both Episcopalian, at least as they, grew up and stuff. My mom still is, but my dad kind of just stopped going to church altogether. So I don't know how much he ever really believed in it. But anyway, and if you don't know, Episcopalian churches are kind of like, uh, they resemble Catholic churches in all of the kind of ceremonial ways for the most part, but they deviate from Catholics in terms of actually like taking a stand on anything or expecting people to actually like stick to stuff. So they've been referred to as Catholic light by some people because it's like, you know, well, here's these things that we believe in, but no pressure.
yeah.
Whereas Catholics are very heavy on the,
So
using words like mortal sin and
yeah.
and kind of doing the really heavy guilt trip thing.
So
Um,
it would be difficult to be a lapse. What is it? Oh god, I can't say the word. Lapse, because you have that like lapse Catholic. So it would be difficult to be a lapse Episcopalian because it's pretty lapse already.
Yeah, right. Because they're so like not strict about anything that you can just kind of. I mean, no, that doesn't mean an individual church wouldn't be more so. Like that's the thing with Episcopal churches. Like there's ones that are, for all intents and purposes, Catholic churches. They're not just not officially in that, you know, deal to all the way down to ones that people show up in shorts and t-shirts and say whatever, and there's like there's not much structure to it. So there's a big variety there. And I have noticed from some things that I've seen that some Catholic churches have gotten really, laid back compared to what they used to be as well. So I think there's just been some cultural shifts, at least in this country, that kind of are reflected by church populations. But um, anyway, at that time, I had made up my mind. I was actually going to, and later on, I was planning to do videos about this for my Faith and Type series and stuff about like my spiritual journeys and all that kind of stuff. But I'll just say very briefly that I was in uh, what's called RCIA, which is I think it's Rite of Catholic Initiation for Adults. I think it's what it stands for. Anyway, I went to these classes at a church, the Catholic church that's closest to Texas A&M campus, St. Mary's, and so I was going to this, and then I decided that if I went, I transferred from the junior college to a university, that it was going to be one that was a Catholic university. So I went and visited two of the Jesuit universities, University of San Francisco and Gonzaga, in Spokane, Washington. So I enjoyed both of those trips, But of course, I ended up not only not going to either one, but dropping out of college altogether. Um, so that was a point in my life where I, for a while, just went completely aimless. Oh yeah, I dropped the RCIA thing before finishing it also. So I basically one by one dropped out of everything that I was doing. Quit my job, dropped out of school, dropped out of church related stuff. Just one by one, basically just canceled everything in my life that I was doing. So
just
yeah, there's the short answer to how college went.
but it's like it would have been. How much of a difference would it have been though, if the the American education system was much more tailored to the needs of the individual, where you didn't have to this one size fits all policy of making people do mathematics or any other subject that they're not suited to, and where if they could do the subjects that suited them, they wouldn't have to do all of these compulsory subjects that put people off and make them drop out of college.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk for hours about that, but I'll just say, yeah. I mean, that's there are efforts to do that in some areas in America. So I can't say that that's like something that's never tried anywhere, but not up to my taste, which sort of goes to the point about how most schools they're run by guardians for guardians. Uh, they don't sort of take into account students that aren't going to learn the same way or aren't going to gravitate towards it the same way. And so I read a thing, might have been on Crazy's website, I can't remember, but it was talking about, it was an article about how even though, possibly as much as like 30-something% of students in schools are in, public schools anyway, are artisans, that less than 5% of the teachers are, and less than 1% of the administrators. So, despite the fact that there's a lot of us there aren't a lot of people that understand us there, because most of us don't end up becoming teachers, and definitely not very many becoming administrators.
And so, in terms of it being one size fits all, not only is it bad for those kids who are not good at everything, those kids that are very good at a particular subject, they're not being taught it at a high enough level. So, for instance, if you compare someone doing mathematics in England, where it's an elective subject, to someone doing it in America, because when I looked at that in it, because I did a little bit of tuition when I was like teaching people mathematics, I looked in the American SAT book, I was like, bloody hell, this is like fitted down to fit everyone, and that's not good for those. Oh, and so if it was more tailored, those kids that were like really good in a particular subject would be taught that subject at a really high level, rather than, because you hear all these stories, about those kids that they're too smart for school and they graduate early, and then you have a situation like you were saying about colleges. Colleges would say, oh, we have to do all these extra subjects to compensate for the fact that people coming out of high school aren't smart enough. And that's why it's 4 years in the US rather than 3 years in the UK. Just to get the students up to speed. Oh, what's happened? Is the sound gone?
No.
Okay, you just let me hang out there. Okay.
I didn't know what to say to that.
Yeah, there's a little bit of an NT things of how it should be.
Okay, so was there anything else you want to know about school?
No, just come to the conclusion that if there had been more school choice of subjects, things would have worked out differently.
Yeah, probably so.
Because and it's bad for a lot of people who. Right. So, what happened then after school? And you could also tell us that thing. At one point, you said you were working in a radio station, and then you went in and then had to get back and all that kind of stuff. That was.
Yeah, well, I did a couple of summers at like I said, the college radio station, and I wanted that obviously to turn into some radio career, and it never did. Um, Same thing with the restaurant management thing. I started my first job basically was McDonald's, and so I'd been promoted to a manager, and then that didn't take off. I ended up being fired from that job. Um, so the food service aspect, that has been the thing I've been in the most in my working life, has been food service stuff. But eventually, after doing several jobs in different restaurants, I got the opportunity to move to working in a franchise office, which is what I've been doing for the last 10 years plus. um, which I can say I enjoy more than the restaurants in some ways. But of course, there's other things I miss about having customers, because talking to the regulars and things like that. I miss kind of those aspects of it, sort of the camaraderie of working in a place like that, because it's sort of a high pressure type of deal where you have to do a lot of stuff in a short period of time, and it's not easy, especially when you're shorthanded, and so you have kind of a high intensity environment where the people that you work with, um, you sort of develop a certain relationship with those people, because it's sort of like you go through the war together. It's sort of the feeling. So there's not as much of that in the office, because the environment is more relaxed. But we have our moments where things are more. And lately it's been kind of stressful because of stuff that happened. I won't go into the details of that, but because of certain changes made to uh, to our computer system and stuff, a lot of things I was doing take longer now, and I got behind, and so I had um, had a lot of things that was causing stress on me for. But yeah,
Because you used to talk about it in a positive way of like all these different things that can happen during a day that would keep it interesting.
yeah, and that's still that's the case. It's still the case. It's just when I'm behind on working, then a lot of those things just start. It's hard to enjoy them as they happen, because when that delays my work just causes me more stress. Whereas when I was in a situation where I had more time to get my work done, or I was regularly getting them things I had to do done, then those other aspects of the job were more enjoyable, because I could sort of enjoy the variety of different things throughout the day, different people that would call on the phone, people that would come in the office, and there was when you're in a position where you feel like I can kind of deviate some from the script, so to speak, on my job, but I can still have fun with these things, and I can still get my work done, then you don't have as much stress, or at least I don't, because I actually work better when there's a little bit of pressure on, but uh, not so much that I'm like buried in it, if you know what I mean. Like um, when it's the case. It's the same thing with like somebody who's like in sports. Somebody can have the thrill of a high pressure situation in sports where there's a lot of physically demanding things on, and they're trying to win the game or whatever. But if you're on a team that's always losing, that begins to weigh on you. And to players, there starts being infighting, and blame the coach, blame the players. Who do you want to trade or get rid of? And so there's more stress, for players on a losing team. So when you're in other types of work environments, where you can have that kind of feeling like no matter what I do, I'm always behind. So it's like we're repeatedly losing, and need to break that streak. So it's hard to enjoy it when that happens.
Right.
But yeah, as far as the interests I've had turning into any careers, that hasn't really happened yet. Though I've had the opportunity to do certain things, like I for a short time I was writing for a radio countdown show that was on a internet radio station, and again it was another case where I thought, oh, this will turn into some radio career, and it almost did. We came
Yeah.
really close to having a deal done that was going to put the show on a large network of radio stations, and then the parent company decided to go in a different direction and shut that down, and it never happened. So I ended up going back to food service. So again, that's kind of been how things have happened. It's like I never had that big break, but I've
Yep.
had. I still always try to say it in a way that I don't like sound like I'm complaining that I haven't had opportunities to still have fun and do a lot of cool stuff in my life, because I have, despite not actually having a career at least not yet, in any of the things that I really was the most interested in. So, and restaurant stuff actually was one of the things, like I talked about earlier, that I had some interest in. What I really would desire to do in the restaurant business was to be in a position where I had creative control over a restaurant in terms of the presentation of it. How we did, like, here's what the place looks like. Here's the menu. Here's the way we do things. Like those aspects of it, I always like. That's another thing as a kid that I would make up, my own restaurants. Like when I would be sitting and eating at the kitchen table, I'm just eating a hamburger, and I would pretend like I was, in my head, I was doing a commercial for the restaurant that was serving this hamburger, things like that. So I always had those kind of creative ideas that would be flowing in me. When I would eat cereal, I would come up with commercials for the cereal I was eating and stuff like that. So I've always had those kind of desires too, to have, a job, again, related to performance, but performance as it comes to, either advertising or stuff related to food and the restaurant business, or food business, things like that.
Excellent. So that's probably the end of this hangout, and the next one will be on Jeff's interests and hobbies. Well, here we go. And we will end